Welcome to Darker Days Radio presents Dark Iron, a War Machine, Iron Kingdoms, the world of Western and Modern podcast. I can't remember how we opened these things because it's been a while because we've been so busy with loads of other things, but it now seems timely to restart and kick this going off properly. Now there are so many books out again for the RPG. Anyway, I'm Chris, one of your regular hosts, and I am joined by Mike.
Hey, how's it going? Really excited to talk about Iron Kingdoms. It's been an interesting journey the last couple of years since Mark IV came out, and of course the brand new version of the RPG. And I'm pretty excited to come back and talk about Iron Kingdoms and War Machine a little bit. This is cool.
Yeah. So listeners will realize we did, I think, 2 episodes. We did 2 episodes, and then we got caught up with other things. And I think it's just life is busy with many things, and trying to get certain podcast episodes out and other episodes rolling. But it feels re-energized to get this going properly, this mini-series. I say mini-series, this sub-series of Dark Days Radio. Previous episodes, let's think, were a intro to the Iron Kingdoms, and the other one looked at the city of Corvus as a location and why Corvus is a fun location to set your stories or use it as a place where your adventures begin in the Iron Kingdoms. And also Corvus has lots of plot opportunities with it. Though for this episode, we're going to look at the Orgoth Sea Raiders, because the Orgoth are pretty critical to the history of the Iron Kingdoms, and so present some fun roleplay opportunities, both in various different points within the history of Iron Kingdoms, depending upon when and where you want to set the roleplay game. So let's just do a brief overview, because I think a lot of shit's happened. A lot of things have happened recently. So right now, Iron Kingdoms, the IP, which means it includes War Machine, the card game, what else is it? Riot Quest, I think it's called.
Everything that basically games, grind, a lot of things.
Yeah, all of that falls under the Iron Kingdoms IP. That is now owned by SteamForged Games, who you might know from things like Guild Ball or God Tier. They will be continuing the development of the RPG and the war game, also with the designers from Privative Press, who will be involved in that development. So Privative Press is not owned by SteamForged; it's more like their consultants then, in that sense, to keep that roadmap going for the games.
We don't really know what happens, but it seems as though they sold the IP, but there's some sort of a contract that still exists for them to keep doing development and miniature design and other things. So I think that's pretty cool, because it means that people that were already working on it and have been doing a great job with Mark IV, are going to keep working on it, keep up with the artistry, the imagery, and also the rules development, so there shouldn't be any hiccups. I was just on the SteamForged website today, and it seems like they're going to be shipping out War Machine stuff again in July. So
yes,
pretty much there's only like a 6 week gap in the ability to get miniatures and things. And obviously, local game stores still have their stock as well if you need to pick something up.
Yeah, it's it should also help address issues with shipping, because SteamForged, I mean, let's be honest, you have to honestly look at it, is that I think this represents an opportunity for War Machine to be a back in the shops, to get that market penetration, which is mostly harder in this day and age than it was even 20 years ago, because there's only so much space on the shelves, and there are many more fantasy and sci-fi war games than there were back when War Machine came out. The world has changed in that sense. It should also mean it also means SteamForge are looking at they already have done. They've rejigged many of the boxes of minis that you can get. So in order to make it easier to get into the game, so you can just get a Warcaster and 2 Warjacks, and you can start playing from that. Yeah, sure, it's going to be like 60 quid, but that's 2 warjacks. They're pretty beefy. You can get all the weapon choices and head choices on them, so you can try out lots of different combinations and combos in your games. So that's pretty cool. And of course, the really cool thing is it'll still be 3D printed, and that allows them to start really working with distributors in Australia as well. So they're finding a printer down there to get the minis out, which is cool. And
interesting.
The other thing is, Private Press, I believe, will still keep printing and be distributing from the US. So that's what I mean. It allows greater leverage of a company that has the funding, I guess, to do it. And also, because of SteamForged Games' origin, as in the creators of the company were War Machine like tournament pros, they love the game, so it's in good hands in that sense. The other thing that's important to say is that with SteamForged, this means we're getting a new starter set, which is going to be hard plastic, which is a wow. Like, okay, hard plastic. That's something we've only seen a few things of in War Machine in the past, like Colossals, and I think they did some Warjacks in hard plastic, but not many. And of course, coming up soon and was delayed because of this is the new Kickstarter for the RPG. So Strangelight Workshop, which I've done some writing for, will be going to Kickstarter soon. I have seen some of the art and it is wicked. It is going to be ghost hunting in the Iron Kingdoms. It means there's going to be rules that make it more of a... So it allows you to really do that kind of ghost hunting with regular mortals. You're not going to be... the type of characters that are going to become great heroes with massive swords or massive guns doing the crazy things on battlefields in the Iron Kingdoms. No, you're the lowly ghost hunters that work at the Strangelight Workshop. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
So that should give people a quick flavor. But if you're coming back to this in the first episode, you're picking up and you listen to Dark Days Radio. Mike, give us a quick overview of Iron Kingdoms as a setting, and then we'll get into the Orgoth.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Iron Kingdoms are a world of magic, science, and steam, where the warfare of this land has been shaped by the creation of these powerful warjacks, which are these magically animated steam mechs immune to many hand weapons. They really need to be taken out by either giant beasts, other warjacks, or maybe something like artillery or magic as well. To this backdrop of these warring nation states are a lot of personal stories. So the war game is driven by the adventurous struggles and the inner demons of the warcaster and warlock characters, while the RPG centers on your characters, of course, as you explore this dangerous world of magic, broken battlefields, and courtly intrigue. I really want to highlight the way that the story is about these personal characters. A lot of people will pick up a warcaster and play that character, and then they'll start reading the story about them and following it, and they really like it. Characters like Stryker, Denegra,
Kane,
Morgul,
Alistair Kane.
I'm talking about the Scorn characters. Yeah, that was the faction I liked the most. Yeah,
Hexorus was great.
Yeah,
and that's good you point out those, because I think what's quite interesting if we just talk about War Machine in that sense of those characters, the Warcasts and Warlocks, through editions we've seen these characters grow and evolve, and we get new versions of them to play as, because roughly about 20, I think it's about 25, 30 years have passed since the original Scorn invasion during the Witchfire trilogy to present day within the setting. And so the characters have gone through lots of things in that time period and even changed factions. So, for instance, we've seen the Iron Lich Asphyxius of the Crix faction eventually became towards the end of 3E was kind of cleansed and was a warcaster for the Cyrus faction. We've seen similar happen to Gorshade, again a Crixian warcaster, who then, I can't remember his actual name, but he then was part of the Retribution of Syra. So we see a lot of that, and I think that's a really, as a war game, as a setting, I find that a really interesting aspect that we've seen these characters evolve and also change in some quite dramatic ways.
Yeah, it's really cool, and you can actually see it because Matt Wilson, who runs Privateer Press and created the Iron Kingdoms along with others, he used to work for AEG doing Legend of the Five Rings, and they have a similar idea of following these personalities through these stories. So I think it was a good idea and a good concept that they brought forward. Now,
yeah. Go on.
Sure. I was going to continue kind of and bring us back to the Iron Kingdom. So, Dark Days Radio is a horror gaming podcast. So bringing back to the horror gaming perspective, the Iron Kingdoms has a lot to offer. For example, there are the dragons, which are these huge, gigantic alien monstrosities that kind of slowly corrupt and plague wherever they are, effectively kind of creating this sort of radiation that twists bodies and enthrall minds. The Cricks that Chris has alluded to many times, meanwhile, are a sort of alliance of necromancers and pirates. And they capture unsuspecting victims to create these sort of necromechanical armies that they'll hope to one day conquer the world with. Meanwhile, you also have the Protectorate of Menoth, which kind of deal with more mundane concepts of religious fanaticism. But it's a lot more dangerous when your god actually gives you literal holy fire. So there's a lot of things, a lot of cool things in this setting, which I think will interest listeners. Or if people haven't been paying attention, there's a lot going on. And a lot of things have changed as well. For example, I just found out this morning that Protector of Menoth really aren't around at this point.
Oh no! We've seen a lot happen, like the end of Mark III, which basically was the Infernal War, where the Infernals invaded. And we'll talk about that in relation to the Orgoth as well. That led to, that led to obviously a lot of civil unrest. Lots of old enemies became allies. Kador, Signar, Protector of Menoth. Obviously, even Cricks allied all together to defeat the Infernal invasion. Also, you have the Grimkin. And the Grim and the Grim Harvest was all to stave off the eventual invasion. And so you're right. Many of these factions have undergone changes or are gone completely, and we see that also in the role play game. Like originally, the Convergence of Cyrus was this kind of like cult / kind of like revolutionary technological group. They're because of the events of the Infernal invasion, the members of their order are now more integrated within the kingdom of Signar. Likewise, because of the importance of Thamarites, so we have to talk about Morrow, who's one god, and Thamar, who is the twin god of Morrow and represents that kind of left-handed path. Thamarites, though they dabble with necromancy and dark arts, are at their heart also against demons, because demonic possession is anathema to self-empowerment, because you're basically selling part of your soul to gain power. So now, because of the Infernal War and the importance of people like Alexia from the Witchfire trilogy, who is now who is a master necromancer wielding the Witchfire blade, her and other Thamarites are now openly accepted, near enough openly accepted, within society. And the Order of Illumination sees the importance of having both aspects of kind of witch hunters and witches in order to fight the true enemy, which is infernalists. And that's something which I think we're seeing, and this is something we'll talk about we'll talk about the Kingdom of Signar in the modern times, because I think that's a huge topic. We're seeing this kind of like revolution occurring in society where there's more equality within the setting, and people are getting better representation, as it were. It's not just the lords and ladies in charge. They're all good. A good number of lords and ladies are dead, and so who are you going to employ to be your knights and your commanders of your armies? You have to turn to the middle classes and and below. So
I kind of like that. It's got kind of a feeling like post Napoleonic Wars, eventually
Yes,
got to
exactly.
1848, and there was all the revolutions across Europe. Except in this case, they've been more successful, and it's a bit more of an egalitarian society, but also still deeply divided under nationalistic lines, and also, invasions from beyond the sea. Which I think, to bring us back, is gonna bring us to what we're going to focus on today, which is some of the most horrific archbastards of the setting, ones whose oppression created the current struggles in the Iron Kingdoms, the Orgoth.
Okay, you know what? Okay, let's talk about the Orgoth. It's funny you said arch bastards, because I think back in the day when War Machine and Iron Kingdoms first came out, you were like, Cricks are arch bastards, right? A kingdom of necromancy and pirates and so forth, under the thrall of I can't think of his name. What's the name of the dragon?
Torok. Yeah.
Torok. So you think, God, they're complete assholes, right? Wanting to invade the realms and take everyone's souls and create this undead kingdom. And then you think, okay, fine. Maybe they're not quite bastards, because the Scorn then turn up and we learn more about them. And they're also doing things like mortarthurgy and so forth. And you think, they're pretty awful.
Yeah.
And then you think, oh, maybe not, because then there's also like the Everblight with their dragon blight and strange kind of mutation that they do. Are they really bad? You think, yeah, they're pretty bad too. And then the Infernals turn up and the Grimkin, and you're like, oh, the Grimkin. I'm on the border on, like, are they arch bastards? I don't think so. Infernals are definitely arch bastards, and we can get into that. But then the Orgoth are like the Infernals' twin brother in this, and this is why we'll get into why even the Cricks look like good guys compared to them, which is a really weird thing to say, but Cricks fucking hate these guys as well, because how can you have a kingdom of undead if all the souls are being eaten by demons from the outer void, right? That's the point. Mm-hmm. So okay, the Orgoth, why are they critical to the Iron Kingdom? So in the current setting, it's roughly, I think it's something like 2,000. It's about 2,000 years in the past. I can't quite remember the amount, but it's
1,200 is when they arrived.
Okay, good. Yeah, before rebellion, and the Orgoth are kind of like this invading force on ships. They're very kind of, let's say, they're kind of almost a bit like they're kind of got that Viking feel to them, but their armor and weapons are adorned with demonic faces and so forth, because they are the Orgoth actually a subservient force in league with demons known as the Felgirth Order. And so the Orgoth essentially were desperate for immortality, which seems to be the whole thing of the Iron Kingdoms. Everyone wants to be immortal. In exchange for souls, they got foul magics and other knowledge and abilities. And the Orgoth warlords would go out to enslave and get as many souls to ensure their immortality. And that's why they came to Western Amoran. They just saw these lands to take these souls.
Yeah, it's interesting because they're kind of they're a neat contrast, as you mentioned, to like the Scorn, for example, who do not respect other people's souls at all, but really respect their own. One thing that can happen with the Scorn is, they're trying to stave off death. Some do become exalted and become immortal, but others, like your ancestors, you might store into these sacral stones, basically, and guard them to kind of keep their souls from going to the afterlife where they'll be eternally tortured.
Well, I think the Scorn don't actually have any gods, so their souls get lost in the void in Urkan.
Yeah, I believe that's correct, yeah.
So most mortals, their souls will go to part of the afterlife, Urkan, which is, and their souls will be, I think there's basically a city there which is that was built by Menoth, and there's similar for other gods. But the Scorn don't have that, and I guess the Orgoth didn't like that setup. Being humans, they would have been created by Menoth. However, they must at some point, I can't remember if I've read it, but they must have said their own kind of like, to hell with you, Menoth, we want to be immortal. So this immortality is quite interesting that the Orgoth pursue, which I think is really kind of different, and again is different to say what we see with like the undead that we get with Crix and similar. So the Orgoth seek immortality by sacrificing as many souls, so that when a Orgoth warlord dies, their soul is then is attached to the next born in their bloodline. So it's a direct descendant of theirs as a child, or gets their soul ripped out of them and cast away, and the soul of this dead Orgoth warlord is then placed back in that body, which is just horrific.
Yeah, arch bastards. And again, completely different with the Scorn trying to. The Scorn are horrible; they're very bad, but they are trying to protect the souls of like their ancestors, for example. And these guys, they just don't care. They don't care at all.
Exactly. So by doing this, they have some dim memories of their previous existence. So this could occur multiple times. Every time they die in that body, their soul gets shunted back into a new one, into a new body. And this is all done by these war witches on the Path of Shadows. So they oversee the transfer of souls, and we'll come back to war witches because it's interesting because the war witches are important to the modern Orgoth society as well, and also the mysteries of some of the mysteries and magics that the war witches performed was incorporated into Crixian forces when the Orgoth were driven out, so out of Western Amoran. So we'll get to that. So yes, this need souls brought them to Western Amoran that's what precipitated for almost 2,000 odd years the enslavement of the kingdoms that were precursors to modern day Kador and Signar and Lael and Ord, and they erected huge citadels in various places. Like Corvus is a city that was a Orgoth city. The city of Five Fingers, which is a pirate city in the mouth of the Dragon's Tongue River, that too is also built on old citadels of the Orgoth. There are tunnels throughout, and old temples and old tombs to the Orgoth, and that means many Orgoth warlords and generals and so forth are entombed within the lands of Western Amoran. So that goes on for some time, and then eventually what occurs is that in Western Amoran, Thamar does her business, and I say her business, she basically barters with the Infernals, the other group of Infernals we'll get to, for the gift of magic for humanity, because humans didn't have magic, and that's what then allows humans for mankind to get magic, alchemy, and thus really have the tools to also then create the first warjacks, which were known as colossals. And that's essentially the history of how the Orgoth influenced the origins of the Iron Kingdoms, because once the Orgoth were driven off by these alchemical mechanica, which were ginormous, that lays the grounds for creating the new Iron Kingdoms. So the kingdoms of Kador, Signar, Lael, Ord, and the not pact. What was it called? It was called the treaty. I think it's the Treaty of the Iron Kingdoms. Can't remember the precise term. Is written and laid down in Corvus. So that's kind of really important and is a core aspect. Is a foundational aspect of the setting. Now, the Infernal Order, we'll just come back to that Thamar made the deal with, known as the Nonacreon Order. Thamar basically went, hey, if we can have the gift of magic, you can have the elven gods, which is she basically just allowed them to get hold of the elven gods and kill them, and like I think it's something like 2/3 of all souls in Western Amoran at a certain point in time. So what's known as the claiming, which is basically what the infernal invasion is, because of course Thamar is clearly playing the long game and thinking, yeah, if the infernals turn up, hopefully there'll be enough Thamarites and other mystical mystics and sorcerers and technology that the infernals would be driven off.
Yeah, it's also pretty ironic that Thamar basically made a pact with demons to fight other demon humans. So
yeah,
I think it's pretty good. I like that one. Yeah, I like it.
I think that perfectly encapsulates the fact that she is a kind of a trickster god and looking to do things outside of the box, whereas like Morrow is much more like we need to work together and do things in a nice and ordered way to be better than ourselves. Whereas of course Menoth is another god, the origin god of all humanity, is very much more like kneel before me, give me subservience, and I will give you back divine powers. Which of course we can get into another day because that's all related to where the Grimkin come from. Huge topic, and we'll get into the Grimkin. I think when Strange Light Workshop comes out, we'll talk about the Grimkin because they're properly bloody weird. Right. Well, this gets us then to the modern invasion. So, well, actually, let's just before we get into the modern invasion, we'll talk about the. We can get into a few other details of the original invasion. So, the period of time was known as the 1,000 Cities in Western Amoran, and obviously those nation states then went on to form the new kingdoms. The Orgoth were originally met by the Cardic fleet, and those are the Todoran navy. Obviously, those naval forces got obliterated. The warlord Collegion, I guess we'll call him, proclaimed, "Your bodies in life are ours, and in death your souls shall also belong to us." So that's a pretty good opening line when you invade some lands and you're out to literally like enslave and take the souls of everyone. Caspia, though, of all the cities, this is a really important point. Caspia, which is the capital of Signar, held out, and they built huge walls thanks to the Rulic dwarves, and were able to hold back the Orgoth. And another interesting point is that the Iozan elves were not their woods, their woodland kingdom was not invaded. So there's a question of, did the Felgoth go, yeah, no, because we know they're going to get killed off by our other demonic cousins. The Orgoth did try to invade the islands of Crix, but the Dragon Father Turek said no and obliterated their fleet, and I think a good number of those sailors and those ships that got annihilated are now part of his ghostly armada. So that's quite an interesting point, I think. And as I said, Corvus was founded. The Orgoth didn't really care about people praying to their gods, as long as it didn't get in the way of what the Orgoth wanted to do. And then eventually, it's in 191 after Rebellion. So the Rebellion begins, and then once humanity has now got the gift of magic and sorcerers developing and redeveloping their steam power that they had before the invasion, developing firearms thanks to alchemy, developing warjacks, that's when the first colossal strode out of Caspia. So that's a brief overview of that entire kind of invasion period. There's a lot of other things that go on in there. For instance, I'm not too sure when, but in that timeline, the Witchfire Blade would have definitely been created or brought to the islands, because I don't know if it predates even the invasion. I haven't read something that suggests it, because the Witchfire Blade, which is used by Alexia Cianor and is critical to defeating the Scorn in their first invasion of Signar, and also defeating the Infernals, is a Orgoth. It's a blade of Orgoth design.
That makes sense because it's like a black blade stuff, and they love using black stone and black metal.
Oh yeah. And to finish off, then with the use of these colossals and expelling the Orgoth out of the lands, the Orgoth are complete bastards. We've said before, but they are real bastards because they go, we're not just going to leave. We're going to do the Scourge, which is essentially mean they lay waste to the lands behind them.
Yeah.
And yeah, they burn books, they destroy artifacts, they destroy cities, they just essentially they just raise everything to the ground as they leave.
Yeah, it's interesting because clearly they're destroying things that these rebels can't use the weapons or anything else against them. But they're also destroying any cultural things that they have here, and any artifacts. Obviously, large buildings they can't destroy, so there's still going to be Orgoth ruins throughout Imran in the future. But there's also kind of a second effect that this has. I'm not sure how intentional it was, but because there's really nothing left to tell the victors, the free people of Imran afterwards, what the Orgoth were like, it really raises them to kind of a mythic status. They don't really know much about the Orgoth. There's a few scattered writings that exist maybe in Caspia or Corvus, but they're really a large unknown. And for us as fans of the Iron Kingdoms games, we didn't really know much about them until quite recently. Don't. Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns. We know that they probably have an empire outside in other continents, that sort of thing. But I was trying to look at some old text. I don't even recall if we knew they were human until 2 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever really made clear that they were human. I think that it was clear they were humanoid, but whether they were actually of I think in the same way of I think it's the same way of saying if they didn't take their helmets off, would you have known Scorn were not human?
Right. Yeah. Concur.
They could,
and certainly, yeah, they're all armored. At least for the miniatures in the game, they're all armored up. You can't really see much other than maybe their lower jaw. And that's pretty much it. Similar to the Scorn, in fact.
And also the other important thing actually that goes back to that mythic element is because again, what few relics remain, I think is important when we talk about the Iron Kingdoms, because truly magic weapons and magic items like the Witchfire are incredibly rare in the setting. Anything that when we talk about the Iron Kingdoms, when we talk about this is a magic sword, it's because it is made using the knowledge of alchemy, bond plates, and all that kind of mechanica that allows it to be imbued with arcane essence and abilities. But actually forging just a singular weapon like the Witchfire and other things like that is very rare. So any of these items that such artifacts to be discovered in a Orgoth tomb or even a book of their magic, or even a singular page of Orgoth magic and their infernal arts would be a treasure unto itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting for the Iron Kingdom setting, and again represents the difference between these magics versus this kind of industrial revolution powered by magic that the Iron Kingdoms has.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Chris, you've worked on Iron Kingdoms Requiem a bit. How common are magical items in that game system? I remember in Iron Kingdom 2nd Edition that they weren't very common. It was more about your class abilities and things. That's not the part you worked on. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to remember it in the text. I don't think I think it's definitely one of those things that's basically kind of said that most magic items are mechanica derived, because the whole point about mechanica is anyone can use them so long as you've got an arcane capacity, something that can channel arcane essence into it. So if it's an arcane capacitor that can power your magical pistol, or you're a a sorcerer or warcaster or a gun mage who can channel essence into that device, that will also mean it's magical. But something being completely magic in its own right should be quite rare. Now, I think that's very much up to the storytellers to do. Storytellers, GMs to do, because of course you're using a system that draws from the core books of D&D, so you've got access to all those items. But my personal opinion is, really don't. Like, things like a magic ring shouldn't be a thing. They don't exist. Because anything that the point is, anything that is magical should be something that has been fashioned almost at a level of on an industrial scale, if that makes sense. Like, your magic pistol is the same as 20 other magic pistols because they're made for the Signaran army, right? But like an actual singular magic pistol on its own or sword should be quite rare. There are a few other examples. Like, I can't remember its name, but there is one particular magic pistol gun, which is it's a mage lock pistol, but it's in the previous edition of the game, and it's possessed. It's an anchor for a ghost who's a gun mage ghost. I think it's a gun mage ghost.
Oh yeah.
It's something like the Execrator pistol. I know, I bloody love it. I think it's really cool. But yeah, so magic pistols, rare. Orgoth relics, super rare. You're not going to find them much. But that then gives you a great reason for a plot where you go off to try and find something, and also the fact that other people will be wanting that. And they either want it because it represents some lost knowledge, or it's incredibly powerful. Or it's the missing link in some sort of research that someone's doing. And I can definitely see that, because what magic was recovered from the Orgoth definitely was stolen by two particular groups. The one is Torok and the Crixian Empire. Torok basically took the opportunity to lay waste to a citadel of the Orgoth and take from them all of their mystic technological learnings, which essentially allowed him and his necromancers to form the Librum Mechanecrus, which is about basically taking Mechanica and necromancy and fusing it together. Also, Torok basically allowed asylum for some of the Orgoth war witches who hadn't fled Western Amoran. And so that's why you will see in previous editions there's a witch coven. Their teachings, their magics is all Orgoth. And so they, in the current setting, have been a little bit of a thorn in the side of the Crixians, because with the return of Orgoth, these are basically inside agents waiting to return to their true masters. The other faction I mentioned that also made use of Orgoth magic and knowledge is the Grey Lords, who are a order of sorcerers and arcanists who are part of the Kador Empire. And where things get complicated with them is, guess who turned to the Infernals when the Infernal Invasion happened? Was it the Grey Lord Covenant? Yes, it was. So the Grey Lord Covenant in modern Kador doesn't exist. It got expunged. There are still Grey Lords going about, but they are rogues on the run. The Empress of Kador wants them all dead. So there's a brilliant story opportunity there where you come across one of these Grey Lords who are on the run.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, anything else we want to cover about the previous invasion, or we want to move on to modern times?
Let's go on to modern times, because modern times is where things get really fun, I think, for the Orgoth, and we learn so much more about them, right? So the Orgoth want to come after the Infernal War. Kingdoms are rebuilding. There's a period of peace. There's also been a plague or two. So the population of Western Amoran has been more than decimated because people have fled through the gateway at Hengehold to the other galaxy of Cyrus, to the goddess Cyrus, and other than that, then those people that remain in the Iron Kingdoms are obviously trying to rebuild. That, of course, goes on for a particular amount of time, and then the Orgoth invade because, of course, their infernal masters would have thought now's a good time. And the Orgoth have not been stagnant in that time. They have changed. Primarily, the warlords who used to rule over the Orgoth are no longer at the top. It is now the war witches who lead. Essentially, the warlords were seen to have failed their infernal masters, and essentially the war witches, because they were also, in charge of the exchanging of souls and know all of that magic. The war witches are now at the top and lead the faction. There are a few sub-factions within the War Witches. We spoke of one, which is the Path of Shadows, who are involved with soul magic, funerary rites, communion with infernals. There is also the Path of the Reaper, who are involved with, martial magics. And then the War Witches are forming to clans. So within each of these paths, there are clans, and clans themselves are led by what are known as a matron tenebrous. So they have ritual combat to see who leads them. So that happens every 7 years. So it's this rather, I'm not going to say matriarchal society, because war witches can be male as well in small numbers. That's been occurring, and that's also because modern Iron Kingdoms writers are making the game more inclusive. So a lot of the old things you saw have been scratched out, and we go, yeah, of course they can be a man, or yes, they can be a woman, or in between, either or, they, them. Whatever you want to play, Iron Kingdoms will let you do it. So there's that aspect of change of society, and then coupled with that is the fact that the Orgoth haven't come back without some new weapons. So the Orgoth did, towards the end of the rebellion, when they got driven off, did have some rudimentary firearms. So they've developed those. And they've stolen, as I said, they have stolen lore developed by the Crick. So we're talking about the Librum Mechanecrus. And that means the Orgoth now have their own warjacks, which are very interesting. So their warjacks differ from regular warjacks because they don't have a cortex. So a cortex is this thing made of mystically alchemically attuned metals to create a rudimentary AI to allow a warjack to operate. The Orgoth warjacks don't operate in this manner. Even Crixian warjacks operate more in the traditional manner. But I guess the difference is Crixian warjacks are infused with also souls of the dead, which makes sense. Orgoth warjacks actually seem to be this interesting halfway house between a warjack and a war beast, because the Orgoth have infused their warjacks with the soul of ravenous, savage beasts, and so that is what provides their kind of sentience. I don't know, Mike. What do you think about that as a new thing in the setting?
I like it a lot. I think that's pretty interesting. Clearly they're gonna have to. The Orgoth did not seem to be. Again, there's a lot of mystery about what happened, hundreds of years ago, but they didn't seem to be as technologically in tune as the other, the now free peoples of the Iron Kingdoms. So it makes sense that they would see this technology, have some ideas about it, but they wouldn't have the technical know-how to really make that cortex. So I think this is a pretty good explanation for how they would get this technology later.
Yeah, I think it's really a cool step for them to have this kind of their warjacks. I think that represents the fact that the Orgoth, I get the feeling they're getting at the Orgoth don't invent, they steal, or they exchange souls for. They're not innovators, they're assimilators.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
They're colonizers, aren't they? And then they just appropriate stuff. So the other thing with these warjacks is they're also they're also fueled by not fueled by coal or steam. They're not coal powered. Not powered by Menoth's fire, which would be kind of petroleum oil. They're not fueled by necrotite. So necrotite is basically like the sublimation of. Is it sublimation? Yeah, but it's this condensed form of deathly energies into rocks within the earth where death occurs. So if there's a great battlefield, deathly energies seep into the earth and it forms necrotite. And necrotite is what Crixian warjacks run on. So it burns it. It's very noxious, polluting. It kind of, when it burns green, all those things. No, the Orgoth warjacks run off something called blaze, which is this infernally imbued kind of like lava or magma that they I guess not mine, but I guess harvest from a volcano, and they use that to power their warjacks. And I'm just trying to find the details for where it is, but it's essentially it's a location which is this volcano, which is important to the Orgoth kind of like kingdom and to their rituals.
I think that's pretty good, because long time fans of War Machine stuff will realize that in the old school War Machine days, when it first came out, each of the nations basically had their own kind of element, if you will, and Menoth, Protector of Menoth, had been like the kind of fire faction. So now, of course, that's the Orgoth, because the Menoth aren't around.
Here it is. I found it. So basically, there's this cult within the Orgoth forces known as the Volkar cult. So that's basically all the souls, all the war witches that have escaped the clutches of the Crixian Empire to return back to the Orgoth with all these dark mechanica and necromantic arts. And the blaze is an arcane resource harvested from the raging volcano of Halgreth Grul. The site has been used by the Orgoth for mass sacrifice to their infernal masters for unknown millennia, slowly infusing the molten rock with vast quantities of death energy. So yeah, it's necrotite, but like turned up to 11, and because of this, it burns hotter, and it means their warjacks their warjacks can't run very long on it, as in it burns too quickly, and so comparably, Crixian warjacks run longer. Khador warjacks run longer than that, even, because they just run on regular coal, and it's an easier resource to replenish. And then, of course, we've got the warjacks of, say, the forces of Signar, who run on what are they called? They're called storm chambers. So they're basically harnessing ambient electrical energy, etc., to run their warjacks. So yes, and blaze is also used in other things. It's used also in firearms, and they're mechanical devices that they also have. So the Orgoth have learnt essentially how to do mechanica, but have twisted it to match their infernal nature.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I was reading up a little bit about the current invasion that's been going on in Mark IV, and I have to say I kind of like it. They invaded through Khador, and I think the writers had a good idea. Let's look at the maps and stuff, and using a little bit of a military tactical knowledge, and that seems like the best place to go through. If they assaulted, say, Ord or Signar, they'd be just getting to the beaches, and then they'd have to start scaling mountains.
Yeah, they would.
So it'd be really tough for them. And if they went through where Menoth used to be, well, it's pretty much an unpopulated desert at this point.
I think also the danger of going onto invading through Signar and Ord is that takes you into the Broken Coast, and not only do you have the treacherous cliff faces of those two kingdoms to scale, you're also then trapped in a region of of water, which on the other side of it is patrolled by Crixian, by the Crixian fleet.
Yeah,
not a good setup for yourself. So yeah, Kador being hit makes the most sense.
Yep, it's pretty cool. But it gives them a foothold to go to other places. So I think, in the war game context, they could be attacking anyone at this point.
Yeah. And that really, I think, that takes us up to where we are now. That's essentially most of the information that is available. I've yet to read the novella that are available on the War Machine app that mostly will reveal a bit more of like what the Orgoth are like. But there are also in the app, there are some write-ups of each of the individual warcasters of the Orgoth. So there's Hurushk of the Thousand Wraths, who is a warlord. There's Kishtar the Howling Silence, who I believe is another war witch. I'm just literally downloading it now just to check that, so I'm not talking crap. There's plenty of these new characters to explore that will allow you to see different aspects of the Orgoth. But I think what we should really talk about is how do we use all this information in our games of Iron Kingdoms and get some really good plots and stories going on. So, Mike, I think I'm going to put the question to you, like, how would you start using Orgoth in your games? Like, are you going to set like your game pre-invasion, like during an era of peace, where the Orgoth are still this kind of like, a kind of, this mythic thing that is remembered in fairy tales? I say in fairy tales, but in tales to scare children.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a similar question for you in that vein, which I'll get to later. But I did, brainstorm a couple of ideas for how to use Orgoth. Of course, Iron Kingdom's Requiem is set before the Orgoth invasion. So if you want to play with them canonically for the timeline, it's going to have to be a much more smaller presence, let's say. So, of course, the Orgoth invasion was not really foretold by any divinations or anything like that. However, clearly there must have been some sort of planning that went on into this originally. So I would have a situation where your characters get this mysterious benefactor who's paying them a lot of money or giving them a lot of whatever they need, whether it be magical reagents or assisting them with some sort of a social issue. And working for this benefactor, they start basically spying on the many nations of Imran, be it Lael, Signar, the Dwarves of Rule, or, of course, Kador. And they may come to realize, probably towards the end of such a campaign or chronicle, that they are, of course, working for the Orgoth. I think that's a good canonical way to do things. If I was going to set... go ahead, Chris. You might have some comments on that.
I think that's cool, because I like that idea that you can have... you could have the characters interacting with or exploring old tombs, opening them up. That's all just preparing the way. They think they're just, treasure hunting, but it's actually something far more nefarious. Similarly, I think it also allows them to have a very interesting interactions with like cultists of the non-Icorian order. So you've got a benefactor who's Orgoth, and you're going up against cultists and infernalists, who obviously are who remain after the infernal invasions. There's that. It also gives you good reasons to like investigate Crixian factions. So you could be looking at chasing down agents of Crix in the Iron Kingdoms, or even journeying to the Shard Isles and into the kingdom of Crix to recover relics and lost information.
That's a great point, because as I understand it, the Crix typically have their own agents operating on the mainland of Western Imran. So being able to kind of go against them or maybe raid some pirate towns could be really, really fun and be some cool adventures.
Yeah, and I think it gives you that whole... it also allows you to potentially have some interesting setups where you might run into, and you wouldn't know quite why, and it would sow the seeds of doubt. Running into, say, Thamarites and members of the Order of Illumination, who, for whatever reason, may perceive a little bit more about who your employer is than you do, and hence see you as enemies, despite the fact that you are unaware of your employer's true nature.
Yeah, and if your character's found out, I mean, depending on how much they're getting paid, they might just keep working for them. But that's really up to their own personal motivations. So, yeah, the kind of shadow war with working as Orgoth agents, I think, is pretty cool. But there's also a lot of options for kind of moving Iron Kingdom's Requiem ahead to be set in Mark IV. I think that should be pretty easy to do, and that provides you with. Yeah, what's up?
I was going to say, I was also thinking, I think, moving it forward and thinking, like you say, about where the current setting is. I was also thinking about because of the nature of quite a lot of Khadoran weaponry, like Orgoth Fellblades and the Grey Lords, and so forth. Like, Khador feels like a really, if you want to do stuff that really involves the Orgoth and, say, secret societies and lost relics, Khador is a really good place to set your games, isn't it? And that then leads into what you were saying, like to bring up to date, because then you really are in the thick of it right before this invasion occurs.
Yeah, definitely. Or even midst invasion, I think there's some really cool adventures that you could have. Obviously, let's talk about one thing that happens when the Orgoth are invading is that some of their fortresses become unsealed. They open back up. What if this happened to one of their fortresses, but the Sea Raider warband wasn't there yet? And there's basically a ticking clock for your adventurers and other Tomb Raiders to basically try to go in and steal anything that's not bolted down before the Orgoth get there. That could be really cool. Maybe you could be there. There could be some of the Crucible guards. They might be a competitor. You might be working for them, and you're just trying to seize any ancient artifacts, weapons, anything that could be helping out.
Yeah, that's definitely a route to go. I know in previous editions of Iron Kingdoms, there were also rules for as antagonists. And actually, I'm now looking at it. I'm going to go. Viewers can't see this right now, but I'm reaching over to the Monsternomicon. Let me have a look. I think in the Iron Kingdoms Monsternomicon, we also have rules for. He says, looking at it, it might be under. Oh no, I was thinking there should be. They definitely existed in previous editions, and it's mostly just because I can't see it. I can't find it right now, but there were. You could encounter like the oh no, it might be like the Deathless maybe, or Deathbound Revenant maybe. But those the ghosts of these old Orgoth warlords in these tombs, so you could encounter those, and that would then give you an opportunity to kind of like foreshadow events, because these ghosts are also touched by their infernal masters. They're possibly more aware of the invasion to come. Yeah, it is the Deathless. Here we go. The Deathless are perhaps the most terrifying remnants of the Orgoth Empire, ancient Orgoth lords whose dark powers have sustained them into undeath within the macabre halls, which serve as both tomb and seat of power. Although their bodies have long since turned to dust, leave little but armor and bone. Not even death has stifled their mad ambition. So you could see, that would be a really good plot. One of those would make a brilliant enemy, because what if one of these Deathless has been waiting for a war witch to return to finally put their soul into the next born of their line? That's a fun idea.
That'd be great.
Even more crazy. Okay, bear with me, right?
Sure.
The Orgoth are human, right? So, what if the next born is a bloodline born of the Orgoth and a Western Amoran native back during the first invasion, and therefore one of the players is the next born.
I'm in. Yes.
That's very to reference to reference other roleplay games out there which we're very familiar with. That feels very Warhammer Fantasy roleplay to do that.
A little bit, but that's also great because they've given us all the ingredients for that since like War Machine and Iron Kingdom's first edition. There's always been those couple of War Witches that were still on Crix, so you don't need the Orgoth invasion to kind of play that out, which could be an incredible precursor to the invasion itself. If you choose to not use the player character, you have an NPC be the one that becomes the host, let's say, of the previous warlord. That would be certainly a major antagonist, which could still be running around by the time the invasion occurs. So yeah, I like that a lot. That's an awesome idea.
Wow.
Another cool adventure I had was I was thinking about, the Orgoth start attacking, and obviously different nation states of Western Imarin are trying to figure out what to do, what's going on. I don't think at this point the Orgoth navy probably there's not as much of a power disparity with the Imarin nation, especially because they're a lot bigger at this point. They'll have larger navies, and of course the little tiny nation of Ord is well known for its navy. So I was thinking it'd be a cool adventure where you basically join up with the Ordish naval counterattack to basically attack these Orgoth that are coming in, maybe invading Khador. But your specific mission would be to get onto one of the ships and seize an Orgoth warjack, so you can bring it back and start to study it.
Oh yeah, that's a really nice idea. Yeah, capturing an Orgoth warjack for study. That's some crazy monster hunting.
Yeah, and of course, Ord is very in tune, let's say, perhaps influenced a lot by the Crucible Order. So I think that would be pretty neat.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some other good stuff that you could do with the Orgoth. So I think also, we've kind of talked about like the invasion and dealing with tombs and grave robbing and kind of like that kind of very classic kind of, let's call it classic D&D kind of, dungeon crawling. That it gives you the opportunity to do that to a certain extent. I wouldn't run it as a full dungeon crawl in the same sense, because Orgoth, looking at the stats of Orgoth Deathless, they're like insane. They're like level 19 enemies. They're like mad. But the other thing is, given that you've got infernalism with the Orgoth, again, going down that route of what things were laid out, is you could have some really interesting plots going on with where you could be hunting down Grimkin, who are killing. Oh, that leads into the bloodline thing. Grimkin are killing, for whatever reason, are killing certain people, and that's related to bloodlines. Or you could have people who are cultists to the Felgorth, who are insinuating themselves within the high society and governance of a particular kingdom. And that would allow you to have a lot more kind of like that social political intrigue mixed in with weird fairy folk Grimkin stuff, where you're like, oh, I've got to protect Lord so-and-so, because apparently he's being hunted by these weird raven human things and a person riding a weird giant bunny rabbit, like kind of craziness. Like, the Grimkin are weird, but I think you could do kind of that switch and bait kind of stories where it's not quite really obvious what the true monster is.
Indeed, yeah. It presents quite a moral dilemma for the characters in that case, and to find out that this bloodline is indeed Orgothian in partial origin. And if it's actually while the invasion is occurring and there is that, threat that exists, that does kind of ramp things up for the characters as well, if they have to make their choice of who to support.
Let's think, what else is there? I think that we may be kind of, I think we may have covered we've covered quite a few different ideas there. I think the main point is then that within the game, for most of the, if you're not setting it concurrently with the war game, and you're just playing Iron Kingdoms as set either like during what we call Requiem between Mark 3 and Mark 4, or you set it in the period of second edition roleplay, which would be between Mark 2 and 3, or which basically coincides with the invasion of Lael. Or if you go for original kind of Iron Kingdoms and go for before Mark 1, so you're dealing with like the era of the Witchfire trilogy. The whole point is that the Orgoth are in your games are firstly part of the background, in that wherever your characters go, there will be buildings that stand that have gurning, horrific faces on them that were constructed by the Orgoth. That's inescapable. There will be tombs and ancient mysteries that they could be involved in trying to recover, or there are places and events. Places and things that have been that were shaped by the presence of the Orgoth in ancient eras. So, for instance, why are the Cricks in this place? They're trying to get necrotite. Why are they getting necrotite there? Because this was some place that the Orgoth performed mass sacrifices. It's those type of things. The Orgoth are woven into the very fabric of your stories at a fundamental level. And I think it's always good to kind of remind people of that, to kind of give that sense of ancient history, which then can do you loads of favor if you do set your games just at the start of the second invasion or as it's occurring, because then those ancient mysteries become profoundly current.
Yeah. One of the things I asked myself when we first started talking about doing an Orgoth episode is whether or not injecting them back into the setting as an active faction was a good thing or a bad thing. There's been a lot of RPG settings out there that have this kind of like mysterious bad guy, and when they finally show up, it's a bit underwhelming.
Yeah.
But I think after researching this and learning more about what the Orgoth have actually been portrayed as, I think it's been done pretty well. They haven't really, changed the setting drastically. We know a bit more about them, but there's still a ton of mystery. These are the Orgoth sea raiders that are attacking. It's not like the full force of the Orgoth nation. And in fact, we have only limited lore about what's going on beyond Western Emerin. We know that they obviously have non-human species within their forces, these kind of ogren looking things one, and obviously some feral beasts that they've captured on other continents that are being used in warjacks or used as solos in the game. So I think it's been pretty well done, and their evilness has not been lessened, I think, which is another kind of important thing. There's a lot that was a bit unsaid about the Orgoth in the past, but even as they've been more detailed, they don't feel like cartoon villains at all, which I think is pretty good and speaks well to the writers of the current War Machine and Iron Kingdoms.
Yeah, I think that the initial worry with bringing back the Orgoth, I think, could have been that where was there a space to slot them in when you've got Cricks and you've got the Scorn and you have and then you have the Infernals that invaded, and you're like, right. Well, where does the Orgoth fit into this? And I think the Orgoth kind of fit into this space that is somewhere between all three. There's an element that feels very Scorn-like as an invading force in that nature, and but then they're not quite necromancers. They're not quite the not quite the infernal forces with their weird, humongous demon demons that were made up their forces, and essentially were their war beasts. Right. They're definitely somewhere between all three, and that's quite a thing, actually. I think to have been able to go, that's the space that this faction can occupy.
Yeah, and with a partial reset of Mark IV, the Scorn aren't really there. Infernals aren't an active issue, and obviously the Cricks are being brought back. I don't think they have any miniatures yet, but the Orgoth really do have
soon.
some time to but the Orgoth, they have some room to shine, essentially, which I think is pretty cool. So I like it. A lot of good ideas.
It also gives you a good enemy. It's always an interesting thing. It gives you a faction which actually, even if you would say play which book am I looking for? Nightmare Empire. So you play in the game a group of agents working for the forces of Crix. The Orgoth are still a hands down enemy, and you can actually be quite happy going like, I'd rather be undead than have my soul taken away to the infernals. It's a weird angle, but it's an angle.
Yeah.
If you think about like the necrotex and the iron liches and the ghosts and the wraiths, they're dead, but they still have their soul. Their soul may be technically at a certain point bound to Toruk or bound to another necromancer or something, but they still they still have their soul, and they still have freedom in that. They haven't yet become completely lost in this exchange of souls for power that the Orgoth want. So I think it's that. I think, again, not wanting to make direct comparisons all the time, but it's kind of like the difference between Chaos and Nagash in Warhammer. It's a sort of similar. Yeah, it's a similar kind of discussion of what is the nature of the soul and kind of, what do you want to do with it. Right, I think that covers everything as an introduction to Orgoth. Hopefully, as more stuff comes out, we'll learn more about them. I will actually try and read some of the novellas in the app. I've also bought recently a whole host of old first, second, and third edition rule books for War Machine and Hordes. So we can dive into looking at particular factions and their war beasts and looking at why they're interesting to play and how you represent them in the RPG. But that's where we're up to right now. I think I've muted this. I kind of would like to talk about for the next episode, either a particular character type or class within the game, like gun mages are unique, quite unique to the setting, or we talk about a location in the kingdom of Kador, because Kador, modern Kador is very different to old Kador. Like a lot's happened. Like revolutions are occurring. It feels like Kador. The changes to Kador, I hate to say, feels like the changes are to like certain Slavic countries and Russia over time, in its change from being ruled over by nobility and an emperor to something that's where that power is more centralized. So, and again, I think just represents the evolution of the setting. So I think it'll be something to dive into and look at those. And it also gives me an excuse to open up some old books like Gods, Kings, and Nations, or whatever. Or was it Kings, Gods, and Nations? I can't remember from second edition.
That's the one.
That book is amazing.
I think a critical analysis of how the different nations and factions have changed would be kind of interesting for Dark Iron, just to look at like how it's changed from being like steampunk but in the late 18th century to the much more later, more updated things we have with like the way that the trenchers have changed and the like. I think I feel neat to look at,
because I feel like we've gone from trench warfare, Napoleonic style trench warfare, to we're now truly on the cusp of Iron Kingdom's doing World War I trench warfare, because the technology they've got, we're getting electrification of Signar. We've got galvanics. We've got potentially. And you can see this in some of the designs. I think we're getting there's a slight element of like what you would call diesel punk coming into the game. So
I can see
that. It's all interesting.
It's never mapped very well, because they had railroads and stuff as well in the previous editions. So it's got a lot of inspiration from a lot of different places, and I think we need to just kind of drill down and look at that a little bit. But that's something for the future. That would take a little while to do. And I think, Khador, just digging into that would be pretty rad, because I also think that's not a typical setting for the RPG. No, it's usually more Signar and stuff, so that'd be good.
Yeah. Right, let's wrap up then. So if people want to get into contact with us, they can email us, darkerdaysradio@gmail.com. They can find us on Facebook. They can go to @darkerdaysradio on Threads, Instagram, X, if you're going to go there, Twitter, whatever it is. You can find previous episodes on www.darker-days.org. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify. I think you can find us on Amazon as well. Wherever you want to, you can find your podcasts, we're there. And then I was going to say something else. And then, of course, we've got a Discord where you can come chat to us about this and any other horror RPGs. And you can also talk about the war games. I think that's basically it on that. Thank you again, Mike, for helping me out with this. We'll dive into some other stuff. And hopefully I will also see if we can get some of my co-writers from Iron Kingdoms on as guests, because I'm sure they've got some favorite topics they want to talk about. Everyone's got their favorites when they write stuff, so
sure, yeah,
that'll be fun to talk about that. And I think when we'll do I will do a bit of a War Machine update soon on Realm of Fire, because I'm going to get into more games of that, because I've got my new terrain, so I'm going to play some more games of War Machine because it is kick-ass.
Awesome.
Great. Well, that's everything then. So thank you for listening, and thank you again, Mike, and it's goodbye for now.
Yep. Take it easy out there.